Sorry. Okay, recording has started now. For the speakers, please turn on your screens again and the microphone.
Okay, data protection. So, yep, everybody's cameras are off to protect your privacy. So now if you don't want to be recorded, you won't be recorded. So, yeah, so Aaron, I really wanted to just reach out to everybody that has attended the previous sessions. Thank you for staying with us. Like, maybe could you give a few thumbs up if you've been with us since the beginning, if this is your fourth episode with us, like give us a thumbs up if you've been with us. Yeah, me. And oh, that's lovely. It's lovely to see so many people. So what I wanted to say is, like, we worked quite hard to address all of your questions, and if they weren't answered during a session, we have answered them in the Q&A that we wrote up and sent last week. So, you know, if you asked a question in the registration, we tried to answer it. Maybe not exactly as you wrote it, but we might have combined it with, you know, 3 or 4 other questions that were very, very similar. If you don't see your question answered, please let us know. You're very welcome to send an email, put it in the chat, and we'll continue to keep trying to answer them, because, you know, your questions are usually everybody has very similar questions often. Some of them that haven't been answered yet are maybe because next week we plan to answer them. So if you ask something about indigenous traditional triggers, or you are asking about epidemics, forecasting epidemics, or you are asking about something that we'll cover next week, that's because yeah, we will address that next week, and yeah, to lure you back next week to the webinar. Okay, yeah, that's just what I wanted to say. Take a look at those Q&As when we send them out. We've answered 51 questions, I think it is, so far. Back to you, Erin.
Excellent. Great. Thank you, Anita. It's been wonderful to engage with all of you through these questions. I found them really fascinating. So without further ado, let's dive right into temperature. So the goal today is to talk about the basics of forecasting heat and cold waves for anticipatory action. And I'd love to introduce my colleague, Dr. Gigma Kiswansita, who's has a PhD in heat waves specifically. And so he's going to talk us through some considerations about extreme heat. And then we have a number of speakers with us today. So go ahead. So just so you have a sense, this is what we're going to do. So we're going to do a recap on extreme heat and cold, starting with Gigma, and then we will have a dialogue with a number of scientists from around the world, Q&A, so get your questions ready. And then we do have, as usual, an optional after party to continue to discuss for those of you who want to keep talking about this topic. Great. And just so that this is a reminder that I did record a number of videos on heat and cold. So if you haven't already watched those, I do recommend doing that, because it's ideally an introduction to some of these concepts and some of the sticky points around these concepts. Okay, Geekma, over to you.
Right. So let's just start with the basics. Why should we even first care for heat waves in the first place? That occasion often comes because many people are living in regions where there is, let's say, relatively limited interest for heat waves, and yet they are often called silent killers. And these figures that I'm going to show will tell us why. So first of all, we should care about heat waves because there is no definition of heat waves. I think that those that have watched the video that Erin has posted have seen this. It's quite challenging to find a definition for all the countries, for everyone, that meets the needs of everyone. That's not yet the case for heat waves. And let's give some figures. Heat waves between 1998 and 2017, according to the World Meteorological Organization, have killed 166,000 people globally. And let me tell you that this actually is an underestimation, because as you might see later on, in many places, the impacts of heat waves are not yet being systematically recorded. And in fact, in many countries, including in the US, in Australia, and also other countries, heat waves actually are the deadliest weather hazard. Another thing is, heat waves, unlike, I don't know, other, let's say, hidden hazards, appear as one of the most tangible impacts of global warming. Remember, when we started about talking about climate change, we're mentioning global warming, that is this increase in temperature. And heat waves are the direct translation of that global warming. They have lots and lots of impacts. We often tend to think only about the health impacts, but they have impacts on the economy, on electricity, on water availability, on agriculture, on etc., etc. So they have lots and lots of impacts on our lives, on our livelihoods. And as I was saying at the beginning, they remain overlooked across many regions of the globe. Next. But there is a paradox, and this is where I ended in the previous slide. In many places of the world that are known as being typically hot, this is also where the interest for heat waves, let's say was, I would use now was in the past because things are changing, but this is where the interest was the least in the world. If you look at the global maps, this is just what you have on your left is an illustration of temperatures globally, annual average temperature globally. And you can see that it's mainly in the global south that the extreme heat is the most important. But when you look at what we have on the right in terms of publications, scientific publications that have been made to understand heat waves, you see that it is mainly coming from regions including Europe, Americas, both Southern and Northern America, but little, for example, from South Asia or the Middle East or from Africa. Next slide. And one thing also that makes us quite worried about heat waves is that they often combine, intersect with other hazards, as this was the case in Southern Africa a few years ago, 1998, but also even more recently in 2015 again, there was a heat wave that was combined with drought. And so for those of you who have watched Erin's videos, she mentioned that the drier the soil, the hotter the heat wave. So imagine you have a drought happening and then this, let's say, exacerbating the heat wave, and then the heat wave also exacerbating the drought impact. So we have this combination of, let's say, deadly hazards with lots of implications. And besides drought, we also have wildfires. So heat waves also tend to occur and be associated with wildfires in many places of the world. And this is an illustration using Australia, but you know that it can also happen elsewhere in Northern America, for example, or more recently, we have also seen that in Northern Africa. Next. And that's not just all. Unfortunately, the worst news is that all of what I've said is true, but it's just based on present and past. Actually, in the future, things might worsen because based on climate projections, we expect so many places of the world to actually reach the boundary, let's say, of human thermal comfort. And those maps are exactly showing that. Just focus on the bottom map. Everything that looks yellow or red basically means a place where life will become harder because of extreme heat. Next, and I think I pass over to you. Oh yeah, just last one thing. Faced with that, of course, what the human community typically does is to develop early warning system to be able to face that extreme heat. Unfortunately, in many regions of the world, especially those where extreme heat is the most challenging and the most severe, there is little effort at the moment being done towards developing early warning systems, as you may see. This is just a map illustrating early warnings, heat wave early warning systems that have been developed here and there across the world. And you can see that it is exactly those areas we mentioned that the heat was the most severe. It is perfectly there that we also have the most, let's say, the least number of early warning systems, meaning that there is a lot to do. And when we say early warning system, we mean forecasting. And so we are going to discuss forecasting of extreme heat today. Over.
Erin, you're on mute.
Great. Yes, thank you, Gigma. And so adding to this context, this overall context, one of the things to talk about today is that heat waves and cold waves are very deadly, but that doesn't affect everyone the same way. So here is a kind of an old plot showing the death rate relating to cold and heat in the United States. And you can see here, cold waves were very affected small children a lot, and then heat waves and cold waves had a disproportionate impact on the elderly. And this is something that is, I think, hard for people to understand and hard for people to conceptualize in terms of their own life and their own risk. And so, one of the things that we struggle with when we talk about anticipatory action for heat or for cold is helping people understand who is at greatest risk. Maybe people who are 20 actually are very low risk for death due to heat in certain places. But their elderly relatives might be at very high risk. And this plot actually might look different in different climates and in different cultures, um, or people with different underlying medical conditions, et cetera. But trying to convince people that they are vulnerable is actually very difficult. So there was this fascinating study that I wanted to share with you that was done in the UK, and they talked to elderly people about extreme heat. And they did these interviews with elderly people who lived alone, and they said, who is vulnerable to extreme heat? And the elderly people in the interviews essentially said, oh, elderly people are vulnerable. We understand. Elderly people are vulnerable to extreme heat. And then the interviewer said, are you yourself vulnerable to extreme heat? And the elderly people in the interview said, no, no, not me. Other elderly people are vulnerable. And here are some quotes, right? This 86-year-old person said, oh, I don't feel elderly. And it's very difficult to say when you become elderly. And somebody who is 76 said, oh, compared to my friend Freda, who's 93, I'm just a kid. And somebody else who's 77 said, we still go dancing. I'm very active. I'm not a vulnerable person. And here's somebody else who's 79, essentially saying that he or she can deal with it. So I think part of the goal with a lot of these extreme heat plans is to understand how to manage public perception of risk. Who is perceiving that they are at risk and who isn't, and how do we manage that? Um, and so then something to think about is, who is to actually look at the data and understand who is at risk in which contexts. So, for example, people started to look at different types of deaths and found that, in some countries, people in their 50s were actually seeing higher numbers of respiratory deaths during heat waves, whereas the very elderly, it was really heart attacks that were most deadly during heat waves or most common during heat waves. Cold related deaths are, very, very high. Extreme cold is very deadly around the world. And I know we're talking a lot about heat waves because the risk is increasing so much, but cold waves are also very important. And then the last thing I would say, and you see these in the videos, so I don't need to spend all the time again talking about definitions, but you can see that there are so many different ways of talking about extreme heat. And these questions map onto different definitions, right? So, the hottest day during the day, maybe outdoor workers, that is very important for them, the maximum daily temperature. And maybe if you're working with outdoor workers, this is a good indicator for them. But understanding did it stay hot at night might be very important for elderly people, or the humidity, for example. So there are different heat wave definitions depending on who you're trying to serve. Um, so I would just recap from the videos that with heat waves and cold waves, we would definitely suggest to start with your goals. Who are you worried about? Um, and how does heat affect those people? And starting with that to try to build a heat wave or cold wave plan accordingly. The other note is that it's not just the people, it's also the climate. I mean, you can see here our world, our planet is so interesting and so diverse. I mean, you get tropical rainforest regions and the Arctic tundra, right? And so extreme heat is going to look different in different places. I pulled some data just to show you. So where I live in the northeastern part of the United States, we have a cold winter and a hot summer. And in the summer, the daytime high and the nighttime low look like this, right? We might have a daytime high in the 30s and a nighttime low in the high, 20s or high 10s. But in a rainforest sort of eastern Congo place, the daytime high and the nighttime low are almost the same all year long. So extreme heat is going to look very different in Congo than it is in the United States. And even within the United States, like in big countries, it might look very different within that country. What, extreme heat looks like and how that behaves. And then this is actually Gigma's slide. I don't know, Gigma, if you want to say anything about it, but the question also is, how do you manage extreme heat in a place where people are where heat is already very high? So with that, I would love to leave you with a few examples of triggers, which you can also look at yourself. So we're going to hear a little bit later about an anticipatory action protocol in Bangladesh that uses a forecast of 2 consecutive days of extreme heat, and then they have a pre-activation and an activation trigger. In Peru, there's a cold wave one, which looks at the probability of a high impact snowfall event. And then a ZOOD EAP in Mongolia that combines cold wave risk with drought. So saying if a place has been in drought and animals are already stressed, and then there is an extreme cold winter on top, we anticipate lots of livestock death. That combination is what triggers the EAP. So you can take a look on the Anticipation Hub at some of these triggers to get inspiration and understand the variety of what's been done. Okay, with that, I will stop sharing. And we'd love to have a bit more of a discussion between people about what extreme heat could look like. So, Gigma, could you tell us a bit about what you've been doing on forecasting heat waves in West Africa? I know that this is one of those places that you were saying that where it's already very hot most of the year. And so how does that work?
Yeah, exactly. Unfortunately, West Africa is indeed one of those regions where it is already extremely hot, and foreigners will even say that across all the year, it's just hot. But of course, people living in the region have a different feeling. There are some specific seasons during which it is relatively hot. But again, up to, let's say, the 20s, there was relatively no interest at all in that extreme heat. First of all, because of competing climate hazards. You know that the Sahel and the entire West Africa region is, let's say, well known for drought, for floods, etc. And as a result, much of the scientific and, let's say, disaster risk management interest was focused on those. But again, starting with the year 2010, there was a major event that, let's say, ignited something in terms of risk management. People started to realize that, well, maybe we are not that much adapted to it. Or I would say people started to realize that climate change is bringing something quite different to the level of heat that they are used to. And last year in particular, the region recorded, let's say, the hottest April month in record. And this led, I think, to a temperature of about 48.5 degrees in Kai in Mali. This is the highest ever value of temperature recorded in the Northern Hemisphere for that part of the year. So people are now having the eyes open. So it was important to start thinking of developing early warning systems for heat. Where to start? We first had a project supported by the French government called ACASIS that built the capacity of a few national meteorological services to provide some heat wave warning, just initially providing temperature forecast with some thresholding. And then after that, the US NOAA, the US Meteorological Service, basically even brought more technical expertise and brought together sectoral experts, and mainly people that are experts in public health. They brought them together with the climate scientists, with the forecasting agencies in the region to start developing some heat wave warning, also heat health warning. And this work was also, let's say, supported by the WMO. And if you may please share your screen now, you will see an illustration of a heat and health early warning bulletin that was developed by a regional specialized meteorological center that was set in Dakar in Senegal to actually oversee the heat wave, let's say, risk management in the region. And so during the heat wave season that basically goes from March to June, this regional service, in coordination with the national meteorological services, but also with the public health agencies in the region, try to issue this sort of, let's say, warnings where they basically delineate where they expect the heat to be the most recurrent. And this is a sort of impact-based forecasting because they do not just consider how hot it will be, but also taking into account the exposure and vulnerability levels of the region. They try to come up with these maps that basically say where the health impact of the heat is going to be the most important. And this actually is translated to national levels. And if you move on actually to the next slide, you will see that many different national meteorological services have adopted this approach. And here I'm showing an illustration of what is being done in the Burkina Faso Meteorological Service, where they work with the National Public Health to also develop something similar, but now at the national level with different thresholds. So this is how the experience has been so far in the West Africa region. I will leave you with just some challenges that still need to be, let's say, taken on. First of all, again, as Erin was mentioning, unfortunately, the seasonal heat itself is a concern, but at the moment, the forecasting just focuses on, let's say, the type of heat that occurs in the West, just a few days ahead. So how about the seasonal heat itself? There is little effort on that at the moment. In addition to that, the interest, the focus is so far on extreme on health, which makes sense. But in addition to health, we have lots of impacts on power, for example, on water availability, on agriculture. And at the moment, unfortunately, there is no much forecasting focusing on that. And this is one of the things that forecasters and, let's say, relevant stakeholders in the region should start to also put some focus on. Over.
Great. Thank you, Hikma. Anita, do you want to start introducing some of our guests who will share experiences from a few other parts of the world?
Sure. So we are very blessed today. Not only do we have Gugma and yourself in the call, and Gugma, speaking about West Africa, but we also have two Met Agency directors with us today. We have Dr. Shameen from the Bangladesh Met Agency. He's going to talk about heatwave forecasting, heatwave in Bangladesh. And then we also have from Lesotho, Mr. Letaha from the Lesotho Met Agency. So I think we're going to start now with Dr. Shamim. Welcome to the webinar. Thank you for joining us today, sir.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. First, I will show some slides and then I will go for question and answer.
Wonderful. And whilst you're preparing that slide deck, we also have Afroza from the German Red Cross based in Bangladesh, who's been working together with the Bangladesh Red Crescent Society to develop 3 or 4, starting to lose track, early action protocols. And we have an early action protocol for heatwave, which activated last year. So whilst Dr. Shameen is presenting his presentation, Afroza, I'd like just you to answer a quick question for everybody. So the early action protocol in Bangladesh is focused on urban areas because we've understood that the impacts there are greater because of the heat island effect that Erin talked about earlier. Could you just tell us quickly, for those of us humanitarians, practical people, what are the prioritized impacts that you are working on? I understand they were selected due to a community consultation process. Could you tell us a bit more about those impacts? And how did you set the impact levels? How did you choose, when to trigger? Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. Good morning, good evening, everyone. As Anita was mentioning about the heat wave early action protocol that we have, which we activated last year, and before developing the EAP, we actually did a feasibility study back in 2019 and later one in another district back in 2022, 2023 to have some data information on regarding heat wave in country. And we tried to identify some of the impacts actually based on which one we wanted to identify what should be our early actions and how we should go forward with our activities. And while working, the major impacts that we found through our study and through our GTKI and also the data collection that we did was mostly on health related impact, some socioeconomic impact on the community and people. And also there are some impact on like other relevant impacts. So the mostly health related impacts that we found and the financial impact. The financial impact was also showing like somehow it was related to health because during the heat wave time, people had to spend more on their health related issues. They need to visit more frequently to doctors, and they were also due to their sickness, they were not able to go to work or something like that. And the health related impact is like they were having more frequently some skin diseases, diarrhea, and also like hot flashes and other health-related impacts. And we also try to find out specific vulnerable community and people, like elderly people, pregnant and or lactating mothers, like women who are cooking inside home, especially on those areas, which is very like on the heat islands. And there we also found that like health related impact is quite high, but one of the thing is like it's real in many cases the struggle we had, like it was not possible to like divide it in ways like which one was directly impacting due to heat wave and like because it's merged with some other health related impacts too. But yes, yeah, based on when we identify like during the rest of the year how much they were getting impacted, and during the heat wave what was the impact level. Based on that one, we actually tried to find out what are the extreme cases and how the number is picking up, and that is how we tried to identify what should be our impact level when we start working on reducing the impact on heat wave on people's health, and also on their the impact that they're having on their socioeconomic impacts. So I think that's a very brief nutshell. We can like with the time coming forward, we can discuss more, or I could share some of the links where you could find some of the details of this study that we have done in Bangladesh.
Yeah, if you could do that, that would be great. So if I understood correctly, you looked back at the historical impacts of when it's quite difficult to find data on health, right? Because like health issues, you know, stillbirth and deaths, even in elderly, they're not recorded as such. They're recorded as other things, not as heat. So it was quite a challenge. But this community consultation, including some records that you could find, you looked at the years that were very, very bad in terms of impact, and you looked at what the weather was doing then. And you combined all of this data with your risk maps, and then you set the level to kind of like those forecasts to match the levels of the worst years that you could see, the years where people weren't able to cope themselves. And just very, very quickly, what are the actions that you've put into place to help prevent and mitigate those impacts on health and expenses?
Some of the actions are like we were setting up some of the cooling stations in some of the major areas where people do not get any shade to take a break when they're walking during this under the scorching sun. We do provide pure drinking water, because like people tend to drink water from the roadside vendors, which is not good for their health. So we do provide drinking water. We do provide some shade materials like umbrella cap to especially the street like rickshaw puller, van puller who were doing heavy job on the street. Apart from that, like for some of the selected people, especially those who are living on the heat island areas, we identify beneficiaries, and we do provide cash support for the people so that people can take some early action to reduce the vulnerability from their end. So these are some of the activities. In the cooling center, we all do provide water. We have a small health camp like things. So there are paramedics and there are first aid support. So if needed, people can have the immediate medical attention. And if someone is having like heat stroke or something severe like that, like there was referral service too, so that people can be transferred to a better medical help. So these are the common facilities that we were providing for people to support them as an early action to reduce the impact.
Wonderful. Yeah. So before the signs where people start to suffer from heat stress, they get into the cooling centers, they cool down, they take water, they take some advice on how to protect themselves before those conditions become extreme and potentially even fatal. And I also understood that there wasn't a big awareness around the heat risk. So that was a big part of like raising awareness on how people can reduce the risks to heat for different groups. So thank you so much, Afroza. Back to you, Erin.
Thank you too.
Great. Thank you for these examples. Okay, so I'd love to turn it over to Dr. Shamim from the Bangladesh Meteorological Department to talk us through the heat waves in Bangladesh.
Thank you very much. Actually, Earth has two types of movement. For one type of movement, we get the day and night, and around when it moved around the sun 365 days, then we get the season. And this Earth movement is 23.5 degree inclined way. So if you see the Bangladesh position, 23.5 degree is just over Bangladesh. So this is called Tropic of Cancer, and from 0 degree to 23.5 degree north, sun moves. And again, in the winter season in our country, sun goes towards the southern hemisphere. So when it go over our country, very it weight becomes low and lightweight. It create a vacuum, and to fill up that vacuum, the wind comes from the Bay of Bengal, and it carry huge moisture. So this is our summer season. This is our southwest monsoon, and wind is coming from southwest, and it carries huge moisture from the Bay of Bengal, and we are receiving huge rainfall. On the other hand, when sun position is 23.5 degree towards the southern hemisphere, then that area create heat wave, and the vacuum, and to fill up the vacuum, from north part or northeastern part, we receive the rainfall, we receive the wind, and from northeastern part there is no source of water, no ocean, so that area is very dry and very cold time. In between these two types, there is some pre-monsoon and post-monsoon period. And this is the pre-monsoon and post-monsoon period is the cyclogenesis period. And from the Bay of Bengal, the cyclogenesis create, and you know Bangladesh is highly vulnerable for cyclone. So this is every year's phenomena in Bangladesh. In heat wave category in Bangladesh, PMD, we have 4 types of mild heat wave, moderate, severe heat wave, and very severe heat wave when it goes up to 42 and above. And heat wave is related with the humidity also. So we have developed some index-based forecast, and with the help of humidity and temperature, we have developed some color-coded early action, early warning system for Bangladesh. And this is not so hard because um, the model accuracy is comparatively very high for the temperature compared to the rainfall. And sometimes we say that long range forecast. For a long range forecast, we take the help from El Nino and La Nina condition because this is the uh, sea surface temperature. And if the anomaly is positive, then we call it El Nino condition. If the anomaly is negative, then we call it La Nina condition. And in this situation, in our country, dry, if there is El Nino condition, then dry weather prevail, and dry weather means very temperature is very high, drought condition, and a very long dry spell means sun is just over our head, and there is no cloud coverage, no rainfall. So that time we get very heavy, intense heat wave in our country. And this is some example of the correlation between ENSO and the heat wave in Bangladesh. You know that 2023 and 2024, we had a severe heat wave condition in our country, and that 2 times was the severe ENSO El Nino condition, and the total maximum temperature and minimum temperature both was over the normal condition. And this is the 2024 heat wave. It gradually it came from India and covered some western part, and gradually it covered the whole Bangladesh. And some interesting research we have conducted that earlier 2020 or 2000, from 2000 there was very less heat wave during the June, July, August, September, even October. But nowadays from 2000 to 2010 and after 2010 to 2020 especially, huge heat wave event is occurring during the month of May, June, July, August, and September. Actually, this event is only for June up to June, but unfortunately nowadays all over the country is facing with some unexpected heat wave all over the season. So this is very alarming for Bangladesh, and the winter is shrinking or squeezing. Rainfall pattern also indicating that heavy rainfall we receive within a very short time, but very long dry spell we receive. That's why the flash flood and flood is going on. So we have some impact of heat wave, and that is gradually increasing. Long dry spell, lightning and thunder activity is increasing significantly. Different adverse impact create different water management, water resource management sector in Bangladesh. Flash flood frequency and intensity is increasing. Agriculture sector with other livelihood sector is highly vulnerable due to extreme heat wave. Riverbank erosion is another disaster. Sea level rise is accelerating. Drought will be increased. Health hazard is, it is gradually increasing, and pressure will be increased in our power and energy sector in Bangladesh. So we are committed to work together to achieve the government's targets for the sustainable development goal in the time frame of 2020-30. Thank you.
Erin, you're on mute.
Sorry, I did it again. That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that with us. It's really impressive what you've achieved, and I think it's a great example for many other countries to think about how to approach extreme heat. And I think you mentioned also something very important that we didn't cover earlier about how seasons are changing. So the timing of extreme heat is also changing, and that can take people by surprise. If extreme heat happens early before people are ready, it can also be very deadly, for example. So I'd love to turn to cold waves. As I said, I think we have a lot of interest in heat waves because heat waves are increasing with changing climate in most of the world, but cold waves are still very deadly, and especially if they're not very common, they can be really a big problem and have major consequences. So I'd love to introduce Mr. Lataha from the Lesotho Meteorological Service to tell us a bit about how you worked on anticipatory action for cold waves. And in particular, how did you figure out how to define a cold wave? Does it include snow? How did you navigate that? So over to you.
Mr. Letaha, are you with us still, sir? He was with us just a second ago.
Thank you very much. I think I'm audible.
Yes.
Am I audible?
Excellent. You are.
Yes, I was having challenges. I was having challenges with my mic. I didn't know. I don't know what happened, but I was for some reason unable to unmute myself. So yes, thank you very much for the platform. In Lesotho, Lesotho, for those of us who don't know, it's a small country in the southern part of Africa, which is landlocked by South Africa. We are totally inside the country called the Republic of South Africa. Yes, and then we because of our high altitude, we experience very cold winter months, accompanied by snowfall events and a lot of cold waves. So, we firstly we were approached by the Lesotho Red Cross to collaborate on defining heat waves for anticipatory action. So the first step was to identify the number of heat waves we experience and try to figure out at what temperatures can we say that we have quite a little bit of very cold temperatures which might need anticipatory assistance. So we gathered our temperature data. After several analysis, we arrived at a point where we decided that our threshold should be a maximum temperature of less than or equals to 2 degrees Celsius in the highlands. We have a region that we call the highlands. It's very mountainous and it can get very cold with snowfall there. As you can see on the picture, is one of the events that actually happened. The car that was stuck in snow, I think it's an event that happened in 2024 in September. And then on the left, on the right is actually happy. This one actually happened yesterday, where we had heavy snow, and then there was livestock loss there. So we decided to say if we anticipate maximum temperatures of less than or equals to 2 degrees, at least for one point in the highlands for 2 consecutive days, this qualifies as a heat wave because we have realized that, well, initially we were using 10 degrees in the lowlands, and then we realized that it doesn't work. It doesn't peak a lot of the events that we actually experience in Lesotho. So that's how we decided that our threshold should be at 2 degrees for 2 consecutive days in the highlands, and that is just for cold waves. And then there is also the issue of snowfall in that incidence. So for snowfall, then we will look at the we'll look at the moisture content, and then we'll also look at the freezing levels. If we have enough moisture, and then we will also anticipate a heat wave accompanied with snowfall events. I think that is how we defined our heat wave as it as on its own, and then for heat wave accompanied with snowfall, then there should be a moisture implication there.
Great. Yeah, so cold wave plus snowfall. And I think this is a great example of looking at multiple hazards. Oh, go ahead.
Oh yes, I was not talking. I was actually
Okay.
waiting for yes.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect. And I think it's also very interesting to hear your process that you started with one definition and then you looked at the past and you said this definition doesn't capture some of the most important events, so you changed the definition. I think that to me, I think that's very common when trying to come up with these anticipatory action protocols is to try one thing and then adjust based on whether or not it captures the events of interest. Um, I think we only have 10 minutes left in the formal webinar, so we'd love to answer some questions. Anita, do you want to help with that? And I think we're going to encourage people to please put their questions in the chat. This is great.
Yes, we have lots of questions that have been answered by Gigma that we've already pasted into the chat. Whilst we've got Mr. Letaha here, I would love just to ask him a quick question because I think it's maybe useful for everybody in the chat. Do you, I remember when we were looking at cold wave, you know, you're looking at all the different impacts, you know, looking at impacts to livestock. And, you know, there was a certain, you know, the animals were taken up high in spring, you know, in the mountains, and then when the herder boys that were very, very young hadn't experienced, you know, heavy snowfall before and perhaps wouldn't recognize the signs, the traditional indigenous signs that snowfall or a cold wave was coming and wouldn't know to move down the mountain. So you have those impacts on livestock at altitude, and then you have the impacts you know, perhaps lower down on the roads freezing and school buses, you know, skidding off the road and getting stuck in snow. You have these different impacts. And I just wondered if that was factored in, or how did you factor that into the forecasting? Because I guess that different impacts might need different forecasts. And, you know, for like icy roads or snowfall that's a little bit higher, or the cold temperatures themselves affecting the, you know, like the fragile elderly or children and so on. Like how do you differentiate between these different impacts when it comes to forecasting?
Thank you very much. Like I earlier indicated, we actually look at the the two events. Mostly or most of the time, we find that they normally happen at the same time, but we try to disaggregate them to say we have cold waves and then we have cold wave snowfall, which is a bit of a serious issue now. So for cold waves, like you rightly indicated, we have what we call the cattle posts. It's not just for cattle, if I may. We normally call them cattle posts, but it's for all of the livestock. So we look at the impacts on cold temperatures on livestock, which is very high in the mountain, which are normally very high in the mountain during summer months, and then if we find out that we anticipate cold temperatures, factoring out the moisture content part, which now will come with snow, we normally issue those types of warnings that we are anticipating a cold front approaching, and then that cold front may give us a snowfall. So we normally make sure that those people in the very high-lying areas, we normally issue out such information to be shared to them, because those high-lying areas, they are much more prone to very cold temperatures. We normally have this information about maybe when we are approaching the start of winter months. We normally call those periods the start and the beginning, which we call transition periods. It happens around April and September. September will be our first transition month, and then April will be our first transition month, and then September is the last month that we also anticipate very cold temperatures and snowfall events. So during those times, we normally monitor for freezing levels. If we anticipate early frost or late frost, those highly likely impact livestock in the high-lying areas. And then during the peak of winter, now we monitor not just temperatures and then also the moisture content now, which when you get very cold temperatures with a lot of moisture, then it will yield snowfall events, which are now a much more serious issue. It will be very cold like it is today, plus snowfall in the cattle post, where the head boys might even get trapped or fall off the cliffs, and then there will be blockage on the roads, which is now affecting other sectors. Thank you for that. I'm really sorry, but I think I'm running out of power on my laptop here, which is very not good on me, because I didn't think I will need maybe keep charging my laptop.
I think you gave us some very valuable information. And if I just may add on a side chat with Mr. Letaha earlier, it was very interesting. He told me that the forecasting capacity now in the country has really significantly improved, and the forecasts are quite accurate now. And where some of the gaps lie is getting the early warning information out to the right people at the right time. So maybe the forecasts are there, but like as practitioners, like we need to like look at who needs the information and make sure it gets there on time, because people have really lost their lives in not receiving the information on time. Maybe they're at altitude without battery on their phone, or the laptop on their phone, and they don't receive the information in time to be able to move down or to take protective measures. And this is something that happened just recently in Lesotho, with school buses stuck on the road and herders trapped at altitude. So yeah, this is something that we wanted to get, a message we wanted to get across in this webinar series, was like the planning around this. Even when the forecasts are quite certain, it doesn't mean that the actions will be in place and ready, and the messages will get delivered in time for people to take action. Right, so back to the questions in the chat. Have you spotted one now, Erin, that you like the look of? Or
Yeah, I was just sharing a resource from the IPCC, and I know we're running out of time, so we can continue to share resources in the after party about changes to frequency. And also, I think people were very interested in agriculture, which is absolutely relevant when it comes to extreme heat and extreme cold, and climate services for agriculture can help people plan a full season, but can also plan decisions within the season, like, when to water, or early harvesting, for example, and things like that. Given that we only have 4 minutes left in the main session, I do want to share one quick thought, because we haven't talked quite as much about actions. So just a note about Zood, if you can see my screen. Zood is a combination of, as I said before, a very dry season. So animals have poor body condition, followed by a winter that is extremely cold. So in Mongolia, there have been some efforts to offer cash, and some evidence that there have been positive effects of cash transfers on the herd size, and essentially the, the, the the livelihoods of subsistence herders. So something to think about when it comes to livelihood support, because there were some questions about this just now in the chat. And then I thought there was one more example. Oh, here, it's the cartoon. Just to think about for heat waves, for example, one of the most important recommendations that we've seen with lots and lots of evidence from many countries is to have people drink more water when it because what actually happens to people's bodies is that in a heat wave they become dehydrated, and then any underlying medical condition becomes exacerbated and can cause big problems for people. And the root cause of some of that is dehydration. But you can see in this cartoon, what I like about it is the point about, if we're putting out public service announcements telling people to drink water, is that realistic? And are people able to access clean water to make it through this event? And how can we think about that access in addition to providing public service information? And Anita, do you want to? So here are some activations. You can find this on the Anticipation Hub and learn a bit more about heat wave and cold wave activations. What actually happened? What did people learn from it? And then there are a lot of resources, especially the Global Heat Health Information Network. If you're interested in working on heat, this is an amazing community of people around the world who are really trying to push this issue. And Anita or Gigma, do you want to talk a bit about working groups or any other invites for people who want to follow up?
Yeah, and just go back one slide. I also wanted to point out on the hub, I think it was a resource that was shared earlier, the anticipatory action and cash transfers for slow onset hazards. There's a case study in there about Mongolia if people want to learn more about Zood. And it includes the forecasting and so on. And then, on the right-hand side there, we'll also share the links to this FAO and IFRC briefing on Mongolia as well. And Afroza mentioned earlier the cooling centres, and you can see that we have a community conversation recorded about cooling centres. So if anybody wants to learn more about how to set them up in the countries that they're working in, there's also a manual, there's also a guideline on how to set them up. And I mean, again, like Erin said, this global health heat network is incredible. You will find resources there for anything that you can possibly imagine. If you want to create awareness raising material on the impact of heat for different vulnerability groups, you'll find it on there. And this heat flagship heat report that Gigma mentioned is a really incredibly powerful document. I really strongly recommend that you read it. And then the last two slides, the next two on the working groups, I'm just leaving them in there for you to take a look at in case you have any specific questions on those. The links between heat and health and heat and conflict and so on. And we talked about gender, the special impacts on women, pregnant and lactating women, for example, and children are well known. So there's working groups that specialize in certain topics. I think on the next slide as well, Erin. And then after that, if you go once more, just that's in there for your information. The next dialogue platforms that you can join, most of them online to learn more. And I think they were the main resources. Apart from, again, I left this in here because I think it's incredibly useful for people that weren't in earlier webinars. If you want to learn more, if you need help in getting set up with anticipatory action, you would contact these different regional focal points and they would help to connect you with people in the country or in the region that can support your anticipatory action journey. And you can contact us, of course. We'll leave our contacts with you.
Great. So with that, I think we'll close the recorded part of this webinar and we can go ahead and then now have a more informal discussion. We won't be recording this so that people can ask more questions. You can ask specific questions or give feedback on what you're hearing, offer new ideas. We would love to hear this. And I'm seeing there are a lot of questions in the chat, so we'll also be answering these as we go.
So Dr. Shamim, there's a question for Dr. Shamim